Dina and Diana so far, and so we got a very small group coaching session, which is good actually. We'll keep the lines muted, but there is a natural break where we have some discussion questions designed to this, and we had envisioned doing breakout rooms. I don't think we need that. I think we just have a conversation around these topics at that point. So should be good. So I'm gonna switch to slideshow mode. Brief introduction of myself. You can read my bio from the on the speaker's notes in the Institute. But I've been privileged to work along with AK-Size leadership team and Heritage Center for about 5 years now, and a variety of leadership, coaching, consulting, adaptive kind of situations, as well as kind of career. And what I do as an independent coach is both leadership coaching and career transition coaching, career advancement coaching. So Jason Pierce asked if I could help out today, and it's a privilege to do so. We'll do that. There we go. So so really our focus is in the notion of conducting a virtual job search because, of course, with our current pandemic situation, so much of our lives are virtual, and how does this all impact the job search? My basic premise is there are consistent best practices and disciplines involved in an effective job search, whether or not we're in a pandemic. Frankly, some of these have been evolving as best practices for years, and we continue to adapt and tweak as technology changes, and now as some have to impact and react. Then how do we adapt some of these to the current environment? And we're going to explode some myths or things that we might have preconceived notions about, and we'll look at how we adapt. Then we have a time to really got some thought-provoking questions. At least we hope they're thought-provoking, to kick around and look at those and how we interact with some of the stuff that's been presented. Because frankly, my objective today is twofold. I always have two objectives when I'm presenting. A is to challenge our thinking. I want to give us concepts, techniques, approaches, or thoughts that maybe we haven't quite dealt with before. And then second is I want to get very practical, give you practical tools and techniques and things that you can do something with and apply versus all theoretical stuff. Then we'll debrief from the questions, and then I want to, at the end, talk about a few resources available to you. So really, I'm going to step through an infographic I developed in going through this process myself. I was with IBM for 35 years, took effective early retirement. It was a kind of a catch between I was ready to retire and they had a layoff at the same time, so I was caught in the middle of that. So I experienced transition as someone who had been laid off, as well as someone who retires. Interesting perspective. And really going through this transition myself, I've helped now hundreds of people through a transition process. Where I found there are consistent disciplines and approaches and techniques that are effective, more effective than others, and there's a pattern to them. And so the first part of the pattern is really assessing ourselves and building a personal inventory of what we are and what we bring to the table. It's so critical to know ourselves well, be comfortable in our own skin, because heaven knows there'll be enough people interrogating us, asking us, trying to figure us out, and whether we'd be a fit for their potential organization. So we need to be confident in ourselves. And how do we do that? It's really doing that self-assessment. And sometimes that's hard. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not natural for many of us. From that, then we have a core of understanding about ourselves. And then what do we do with that? Then the next piece is say, where do I want to go with this? I work with a lot of people across the career spectrum, from college graduates to MBA graduates to mid-career people. And often the question is, do I want to pivot from what I've been doing and go in a new direction? Or what might that direction look like? Once we have that perspective, and it might not be one thing, it might be two or three things, or an area, or a couple of areas, or an industry or two, or maybe industry not the dominant point, but we figure that out, and then we sort out, okay, now based on that direction, that trajectory we want to go to, then we develop what I think of as a personal brand. And we're all familiar with the concept of branding, and we see an icon and a brand name, and so really we are projecting a brand about us, whether we realize it or not. We are. And how does that brand appear? It appears in how we talk about ourselves. Call it a 30-second introduction when we meet someone for the first time. It appears in how we structure our resume and what we're saying about ourselves in the resume. It appears on LinkedIn and other social media, and it appears on another vehicle or technique we use in this is a one-page marketing sheet. I think of it as a resume, a kindergarten version of a resume on one page. And then once we have that perspective, now we have our story. We can articulate where we're going and what we bring to the table. Then it's a series of steps that we apply. Targeting specific firms versus jumping at the job posting, and just being what I call a reactive strategy. Intentionally networking into specific areas and interest and potential organizations we're interested in. There's a concept of informational meetings, one-on-one discussions, apart from interviews, not interviews, ahead of interviews. And then, of course, the formal job application and information or successive interviews. Many times they're screening or telephone interviews. More and more of those are, of course, now being done electronically via Zoom and Skype and other video. Now, all that happens before we ever get to an offer. And why do I choose a funnel to illustrate this? If you haven't heard the term before, looking for a job is sort of like selling yourself. And so what we're doing, we're adapting successful sales techniques and applying them to how we're approaching the market. Because what's our product? We are our product ourselves. So that's in a nutshell, that's an effective job search. Now, I'm going to tick through a few key points here. Part of this whole self-discovery perspective and self-assessment is what makes you you. Well, we're made up of traits, certain how genetically how we're wired. We're predisposed to certain things. We like certain things. We gravitate towards certain styles of doing things and how we're made up. We might be very analytical. We might be very people-oriented. We might not. Then we have a set of skills or abilities that we learn to do. And most of us have dozens of these. We learn to do a whole bunch of stuff. And there are some things we do better than others, and some things we do really, really well. And the third area, I'm a math major, it's got the intersecting Venn diagram here, are interests, things that are of some level of interest to us, maybe increasing interests. So we think about the intersection of these areas of our lives, if you will, or is our personality. We look at some intersections. We look at I think of the connection between traits and abilities as our strengths. It might be that we're very, as I said, schedule focused, analytical. We're good planners and organizers. And it also might be that an ability, a thing we do is learn to manage projects. So my presumption is, hey, if I am an analytical, scheduler, organized person, am I going to be a more effective project manager than someone who is more spontaneous in the moment? Probably so. There's another intersection point that of interests and traits that might be our passions. I'm wired a certain way, and I really love doing certain things, or I love interest, and I'm fascinated by certain things. Those become my passions. And the third one is the intersection of all three, where I'm wired a certain way. I develop a skill that is amplified by how I'm wired, if you will, and I'm really, really excited about it. That's what I call a core competency. Those are our core competencies. Think of those things you do really well, you do the best, you're wired that way, and you love to do them. That's your core competency. Or another way to put it, think of things that you do so well and you love doing so well that you can't imagine not doing as a course of a daily job. Right? So that's part of that. So now once we have that, then so what do you do with that? You know, it's a little strategy icon in the upper right. So now where do we go with this? How do I articulate this? What is my brand? Who am I professionally? What do I bring to the dance, if you will? What's a functional title that I aspire to? Not necessarily I've had, but what's my next target I'm looking for and I'm qualified for? It might be a specific role, or it might be a series of titles, or it might be an area or two. Are there specific industries? So make sure that's part of it. Because a lot of times there are specific industries that are very, very funny about they only want their industry as experience, or they give particular weight to that. What kinds of traits are these attributes that you've talked about, your key strengths, right? What are those strengths and your core competencies? And then flesh it out with other transferable skills, or soft skills we call them, or hard specific domain skills, industry skills, or specific task skills as well. And the other thought is, what sort of consistent impact have you had on your job, on your company, on your environment, and the things that you do, and what does that look like? You can get that across. That is a clear representation of your brand. And so when you have that perspective, then what do you do with that? Well, you advertise it. You put it everywhere. Right? It should show up on your resume. It should show up when you read the About section. If I look at your LinkedIn page, when you talk to somebody, when you introduce yourself and professionally, are you dropping a key couple of power words or keywords tied to that brand. How about your business cards? Use the back of the business cards to highlight some key things about yourself. You sooner or later, you're going to be asked in the career search, frankly, you're going to be asked by a phone screener or the next level interview or the VP, tell me about yourself. And many of us are like, hey, I want to say, well, when you have done this homework, it's pretty clear what to say, right? It's your brand. You just get yourself out there, right? So it's a key concept to think of as the whole notion of branding. Let me flip to another key concept. I call it targeting. And again, it's a notion of develop a list of 30 to 40 organizations. Why? Most of us think of 6 or 7 household names we're interested in working for. The notion of a lot more is a little intimidating. However, what are the odds that any of those half a dozen or so are going to be actively hiring for what you do at this point in time? Not all that great. So, especially in the pandemic. So, look through specific lists, who appeals to you, who you're interested in, who do people you know in your network, where do they work? And just do some research on this. One author says all you need is Google and LinkedIn to do company research, but there are a lot of reference databases as well. You can find a lot out about a company beyond looking at their website. So that's a whole other exercise, but the notion of it's a key discipline to target, develop a list, and then work through prioritizing the list. Once you have that list, then the next key discipline and principle is to network. And we heard about networking a lot. That was just reinforced in the keynote again. You probably heard it a couple of ways of using the power of the network. So when you think of network, most of us think I don't network really well. Maybe I'm not a people person. Maybe I'm an introvert. In a sense, it doesn't really matter. The point is, once you develop that earlier perspective about yourself and your brand, it builds your confidence for one thing. If you have something to bring to the table, and then it's just like look for commonalities, connections. You're pulling threads, and one of those threads is going to take hold, and probably more of them will. And so when you think of network, we all have one. Here's some suggestions and polls around you of groups of people you know, friends, family, alumni, former colleagues, et cetera, and all these others, organizations, churches, et cetera. And not to mention, of course, the power of your AKSI network. And how is some of this exemplified through LinkedIn? We're not going to teach LinkedIn here. It's way too in-depth for that. But it is a huge, powerful connecting tool to expand your network, to introduce yourself to new people, to reinforce, to re-engage with other people. And so I'd say start with your existing network and focus on a strategy for expanding with. Especially, you develop a target list of firms. Who works in those target firms that might be of interest to talk to. Look for commonalities. Where do you have a mutual connection? Start there. And a question you have in your pocket is always, who do you know that I should be speaking with? Whenever you have any discussion with somebody, wherever that discussion leads, great discussion, thanks. Hey, who else do you know that would be valuable for me to talk to? It's that expanding, continuing looking and expanding. One of the things that you noticed that Ian said was about the power of network and relationships. It's about building relationships as much as transactional. That's sort of a cultural thing that he's experienced in Dubai and the Middle East. Here, I would say we have become so transactionally focused, sometimes the personal connection is missed. Now, why is this so important? Quick visual, we all understand the concept of the iceberg, and most of the mass of the iceberg is underwater. Well, I'm going to apply this to job search here. When you see a job posting on a job board, if you still subscribe to newspaper and see what there, that's there for a short period of time. It pops up above the water for a very short period of time. And for example, in the state of Indiana, the state job postings are posted for 1 week, for 7 days. That's it, because they have tons of candidates, right? And that's becoming more and more prevalent. You look at a LinkedIn. LinkedIn has the feature of LinkedIn Jobs tells you how many applicants have be among the first 25 applicants, or there are 75 or 150 applicants. It is not uncommon for hundreds of applicants to be jumping on that job posting. Well, what's going on way before the job is posted? All of this is happening. The management had to say, well, I need to budget this thing. I need the job. This is what I needed to do, and I have to work toward a job description and internal posting, but way before I post it externally, and then I go through screening and interviewing. From the very first minute, the concept is in the manager's mind. Guess what is happening? They're networking. When they work with HR, guess what? They say, hey, HR, who do you know that might be good for this? Who do you have in your candidate pool from previous jobs that we looked at before? So networking is going on. So by the time the job is posted externally, we're at a huge disadvantage. That's the first time we see it. So how do you get ahead of that? Through networking and finding those contacts and having a contact. One author puts it this way: if you don't know anyone in a company at all, why in heaven's name would you risk and waste your time submitting a job application? Because the odds of they're looking at you without any sort of contact inside is pretty minimal. That's a little more visceral than I would be, but he's got a valid point. So, and then once you have that discussion, it's following up, connecting on, for example, when you have a conversation, who else do you know I might be speaking with? Great, make that connection and thank the person who pointed you. This notion of informational meetings is key on this, and it's really separating and disengaging ourselves from the process of job search. And it goes something like this: hey, I'm fascinated in your area. Your LinkedIn profile caught my attention. I was very intrigued. I'd like to use you as a sounding board if I may. Hey, I'm in transition, or wherever you're at, right? I'm just exploring, I'm investigating, I'm looking at the next steps in my career possibly. I'd just like to get your perspective. You look to be a very valuable conversation I'm ahead. Or if you have a mutual connection who actually referred you, you can say, and Joe pointed me your way. I suggest we have a conversation. That way you diffuse the whole weirdness or the uncomfortableness and frankly, the being put off a little bit. If you come that same conversation, you approach Frank and say, hey, Frank, Joe suggests I talk to you and I really need a job. Can you help me out? And that's just off-putting. But if you approach Frank to say, hey, Joe suggests I talk to you. You've been in marketing for a while. I'm looking to kind of focus or reshift there. And I'm fascinated by your background as I see it on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. Love to have a conversation. All right, so that's the idea. And of course, following post-interview. And following through on any commitments. If you've made a commitment, somebody asks you for something, make sure you follow up with that. The last discipline is just, I'll call it motivation, discipline, sticking with it, because this is in the words of the philosopher Pogo, the cartoon character: we have met the enemy, he is us. We are our own worst enemy sometimes. So let me explode a few myths with this whole virtual pandemic thing. The first one is, okay, hey, everybody's cut back, nobody's hiring, pandemic, yeah, there are a few, but frankly, several industries have grown and in unexpected places. Of course, medical, life sciences, healthcare, they're scrambling to keep up, or feeder and supplier industries. It's just a ton of stuff that are expanding. So we're going to explode that myth. Or I can't network because people aren't, they're not meeting, in person. So my networking meetings, they're down. Well, a lot of organizations have just like AK Side today, they're doing things virtually. And in some areas, people are opening back up and they're doing a mix of face-to-face and virtual. And frankly, people are open to these one-on-one informational conversations, especially now. We're all cranked and, being on Zoom so many hours a day and so much going on and e-learning and everything. It gives them a break from all that. So a lot of people are saying, sure, happy to talk to you. Another is I can't interview effectively. I can't really meet in person. Well, of course, more and more interviewing is being done by technology. Or I need to use job boards more. So, hey, much being done virtually. And I will explode that by saying, hey, we need to proactively network regardless, because in fact, job boards are a trap. As I said, I talked to a client last year. We'd worked together in the past, and she resurfaced. She had been let go again and was looking. And by the time she talked to me, she said, Mike, I'm kind of struggling. Now, she had an interviewing problem that came out as we talked. But she said, I've had like 50 interviews, and I just can't get to the dance. I haven't, always a bridesmaid, never the bride, never given the offer. I said, well, let me ask, how have you been networking? Well, I don't really do well at it. So Grace, I'll use Grace as her name, how did you get to 50 interviews? How many applications have you attempted? She said, oh, over 500. And I just went, good heavens, 500? Who has the patience or the pain threshold for doing 500 applications? There's just a more effective way, as we've talked through, as being a more proactive versus a reactive search to the job postings. Finally, what resource do we have to adapt to all this? Well, again, we talked about LinkedIn, make new connections, check in with your existing network. People, and you're not on LinkedIn with them, well, connect them on LinkedIn. That's an easy one, right? Also think through that a small network and contacts and friends and colleagues you have. Think of an e-newsletter strategy. Hey, I'm in this transitional state. I'm looking for this. I'm exploring this. Here's where I'm at. Here's kind of the activities I'm doing. Who do you know I might be speaking with? Maybe so maybe you send groups of that every once in a while, every couple of weeks or so, with here's an update on me. Who do you know? Right? Or maybe it's just phone checking in with them. I always, and this is a pet peeve of mine, in your job search, many of our emails, we just sign off with our name. It's Rob or Mike, right? Always put your area and your contact information. You do that professionally when you're with a company. We'll do it personally, make it make sense. Leverage online meetings like this for informational meetings we talked about, for interviews, obviously. Think through, I'm not going to give you like a Zoom. There are plenty of ways to learn how to do Zoom, but just some key ones is keep mindful of your presence, your attire, your posture, lean in, your lighting, make sure you're being seen clearly, your audio, and then perhaps you might want to do your own Zoom account. You can get a Zoom account for up to a 40-minute meeting, great for informational meetings. It's free. And maybe if you don't have that already, think about adding that to your statement. So we said a lot of this is irrespective of pandemic, non-pandemic, or whatever. These are just effective tools and techniques that I've been working with people for years, and I didn't invent them. I just continue adapting. So here's some questions I want you to kick around. What are you most concerned about or intimidated by in this whole search process? How might you address that? And what's your networking strategy? We talked through networking in this informational meeting or informational interviewing idea. What's your own strategy there? How might you improve on it? And finally, or another question, what's one new idea or concept that maybe you hadn't heard before today from this discussion? And what's one action you want to take from today?